welcome you to Ann Arbor Church. We say, thanks Max, yeah. We say of our church that we're a church not for ourselves. You know, a lot of churches have a little slogan. Ours is not original. I stole it from another church. But all that material stolen eventually from Jesus, at least the good stuff. We are a church not for ourselves, right? That's what we say, that's what we try to live. And I want to open up with just two thoughts here in a moment. The first is that I just want to welcome a special guest that I did not know were going to be here. And when they walked into church, I tried to get them to do something. Sean and Shelby are here. If you knew her at the church in the last couple months, you're just like, they sound great. They are as great as they sound. You are remarkable humans. I'm so happy seeing you. I don't know anything. I don't know why they're here. I don't know how long they're staying. I don't even know if they're going to make it to the end of the service, but we're grateful for that long. John and Shelby were a very dear part of the church for, I think, 4-ish?
6 years. 6 years.
I've only been here for 2 years. A great part of the church for 6 years, and recently moved down to South Carolina to be close to family, and it's a great situation. And so we love you guys, just want to say that. I also want to tell a story about humility. So the topic I'm speaking on today is a topic that requires much humility for all of us to engage in, and for me was a great source of humility when I realized I wasn't living it out. And perhaps you had that experience before in your faith where you come into Christianity, however you come in, maybe you didn't believe in God, maybe you did, but it was kind of this twisted, weird version, or maybe you're still working out of that or trying to figure it out. And you come into the faith and you're always figuring out new ways you can grow. That can be overwhelming or very encouraging. God, of course, does not expect perfection of us. He just expects us to want to be like Jesus. And when that happens, the rest just happens. And this area of my life for many years was neglected. And I've talked about it a lot historically, but it's been a while since we've done a sermon just on this subject. So before I get into it, I want to tell you a story of humility. Yesterday, me and Mike, we had planned for a while to take my son, Rowan, to Big. Big is like it's kind of like, how do I describe it? It's like a Chuck E. Cheese, but like way upgrade. Like, whatever you're thinking about, you're thinking Chuck E. Cheese, like, it's definitely better. Like, not a great starting point. It's like arcade games and like laser tag and like this virtual reality stuff and a giant foam pit and bumper cars. You know, you win tickets and you go to that ticket. You know, when you're a kid, you went to the ticket counter. It just felt like, this is amazing. And then later you realize, like, I'm totally getting ripped off. They're genius. So Mike had suggested we go there, and it was like, 5 months later we made it happen. And we had a blast. We played laser tag. It's been a while. And if you've ever played laser tag, can I just get a hand up? You played laser tag. So you all know that laser tag can be pretty gimmicky. Like, you got that person and their vest didn't go off. You're raging out. So here's the demographic of our group. Me and Mike and one other guy were the only humans over the age of 15. Yep. So I was like, I'm going to dominate these kids. There were 26 of us in this laser tag arena. And it was like, my son was probably the youngest. There were like 4 other like boys between the ages of 11 and 14, and the rest were girls 10 to 12. I'm kidding not. There were 15 of them. And I was like, I'm going to die. This is going to be awesome. I was like, it's a little weird. Like, if I wasn't here with my kid, I'd be like Mike kind of snuck in because he's like the friend of the guy with the kid. But like, other than that, you'd be like, you don't want it. It's like a weird group. So I'm in there, and after the first round, I think we were like in like 4th and 5th place. And I was feeling a little like insecure about that. And then it was free-for-all. And by this point, I had figured it out. Like, I knew exactly where to go. Like, round 1 was just reconnaissance. Round 2 was like, I'm going to post up, and my self-esteem is going to be skyrocketing. And I'm telling you, I was crushing this. I mean, I had kids that were afraid of me. Unfortunately, Mike had to leave before this round. I had kids that were like, he's over there! And I was like, yes, he is. Like, he's up there! And like, it wasn't like, let's band together. It was like, let's get out of here. And I mean, I'm telling you, it should have been a movie. Like, I was just, at one point, I was shooting light. I was single, I was like, yeah, a childhood dream. And I don't even know, my 6-year-old son was just off on his own. Like, at the end of the round, I was like, Rowan? You know what I mean? Like, I was like a terrible father, but I had to win. And, you know, my tag was Batman. That was the name they gave me. Which felt appropriate. And I just felt right. And there's a, you know, everybody has like a random name they give you. And I looked at, you know, you look at the little gun at the end, and it tells you how many points you have. It was like 6,300, which is, you know, it's totally arbitrary. Like, you have nothing to compare it against. And it was like 2nd place. It was like 2nd place. I thought I won by a mile. And I was like, none of these, if any of these other people beat me, like, I'm gonna feel so insecure. Like, it's like 12-year-old girls are like the average demographic. Like, these girls don't play shooter games like I did, and I'm not proud of that. It was just a reality of life, okay? Like, I had so much experience, and just hours, months of experience playing this game. I played in tournaments, and I'm not proud. That's just truth. And then I hear, I got 1st! And I was like, who was that? Like, that better be a grown man with a high voice. It was this 10-year-old girl, and I think her tag name was like Bunnies or something. She beat me by like 1,000. I was like, what? What happened? Like, and she found a loophole. Like, there's no, but you know what I felt? I felt humbled. And it was like a dumb humble, but I felt it. Like, I looked at that scoreboard, and Rome was like, can we go play? I was like, I just need a second. I took a picture. And Batman, number 2. I don't know what she did. I don't know where she's training. But she was incredible. And it was a good dose of humility. And that kind of humility does happen in my life. There are times in my life where I feel like I am dominating my faith. Like, my life, I'm crushing it. And then God reminds me, perhaps, of an area that I have not been crushing it. And about 3 years ago, that happened when it came to my interaction with loving and serving the poor and vulnerable. And so in Psalm 146, we're going to begin in verse 6. It says, He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. He gives sight to the blind. He lifts up those who are bowed down. He loves the righteous. He watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow. He frustrates the way of the wicked. The Lord reigns forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. You know, a couple of years ago, we had arrived in an hour not long before from Florida, and we were driving down the road, and there was a man on the side of the road with a sign that says, you know, desperate veteran help, you know, something like that. And my son, you know, we had stopped at the red light, and he was like right there. You know that feeling, perhaps, of like, what do I do? And that uncomfortability, perhaps, or maybe you don't feel uncomfortable, but it's pretty normal for me at the time. And my son's like, Daddy, like, I mean, it's probably 20 degrees outside. Why is he outside? Super innocent question, right? And I'm like, oh man, like, that's loaded. Like, and I just said, like, I don't know, like, he probably needs help. And right when I said that, I was like, he probably needs help. And Rome was like, are you gonna do something? I was like, dude, at the time he was 4, I was like, back off, bro, you know? I didn't say that. And I was like, well, what do you do? Like, do you give him money? Or, I was like, well, you know, like, prevailing wisdom dictates that you can give them money. You don't know, isn't it? Maybe you give them food. He's like, what's our plan? I was like, I hadn't thought about it. And I was really convicted by my son. And that wasn't the beginning of that transformation in my life, but it was part of the catalyst, right? Like, just what does my son see in my life? Like, what do my kids see? What is true about me? And of course, my son's at the age where he's always taking it further. Like, no, I want to know why. You know what I mean? Like, most people can kind of get the social cue, like, we're done. Like, and he's like, I'm not done till I'm satisfied. You know what I mean? I'm just going to keep going. There's this word in the Bible, it's a Hebrew word that means justice. And if you've been in church for a couple of years, you've heard me do a variation of the sermon. I do about one of them a year. But it's good to refresh our hearts.
Amen.
And there are different kinds of justice in the Bible. I will tell you this, though, the way we think about justice is a very, in our modern day context, it's become a very convoluted word. You don't really know what it means until you really specifically ask the person. And sometimes the people don't know what they mean. Like, if you use the word justice, you have a certain thought in your head, but in our society it means all kinds of things, depending on who's talking. In the Bible, Of the 400 times the term justice is used, 9 out of 10 times the word is meant to mean a restorative, compassionate, merciful action toward others. The word is called mishpat. And we have a whole drop-down menu on our website, Mishpat. And it's meant to be eye-catching. Ooh, Mishpat, so cool, you're a Hebrew. It's the only Hebrew word I know. This word is deeply intertwined with words like humility, mercy, love, compassion. It's not simply the doling out of justice. It describes a state of heart and mind while you are in the act of doing that justice. It's not just an act, it's the motivation behind it. It's got layers, and probably the most famous story that I will cite periodically every couple months is the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan, of course, even if you're not familiar with the Bible, perhaps you've heard this story before, and it's a parable. Jesus talks about a man who was walking down the road, a Jew, and he was beaten almost to death. And he left on the side of the road, bloodied, dying, probably bleeding out. And 2 people pass him, teachers of the law, a priest, the people who absolutely should have been the ones to stop. And that was Jesus' point. He's they didn't stop. Who stopped? The Samaritan. Of course, contextually, if you've heard the story, it's important to know that Samaritans were hated by the Jews. There's a great deal of ethnic animosity between those 2 people groups. The Samaritan stops, puts the man on his donkey, takes him to an inn, pays for him to be cared for, and then promises to pay for whatever he needs. And the whole point is Jesus is saying this is what it means to love your neighbor. We would say this is mishpat. This is the best example probably biblically we have of what Jesus means by caring for the vulnerable. Right? So when you see the word justice in the Bible, it carries a different connotation perhaps than our word. And in a nutshell, making other people's problems your problem is the heart of mishpat. Wow. Their problem is my problem. And you deal with it as if it was you. Right? That's what mishpat means. Mishpat's the heart of God. And God, of course, is the embodiment of this. There's this term called in Old Testament scholarship, it's called the Quartet of the Vulnerable. And it's the 4 most vulnerable people in this ancient agrarian society in the Bible. Right? And we have them mentioned in Psalm 146. It says, the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and the poor are the 4 constantly repeated people groups in conjunction with what it means to do mishpat. It's constant. And the reason of that is because the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and the poor were the most vulnerable in their society. So this was a communal, agrarian society. Most people lived with their families, which sometimes, if perhaps some of you do live with your family, sometimes it's the hardest thing you've ever done. And then sometimes you're I really wish I lived with my family. There are some moments with my kids where I'm I could use a grandparent right now. You know what I mean? Just need 30 minutes. That was very normal. People usually did not leave their homes. Being without family meant you were without security. They were your safety net. All of those 4 things precluded that you probably went without your family. Except poor, which could be that or not. Being in one of those quartets, or being one of the quartet, the poor, the widow, the immigrant, the orphan, meant that you were exposed to all kinds of injustice, mistreatment, manipulation, and oppression. And Nicholas Wolterstorff, who I know you all know, of course, because you're reading, says lower classes are not only disproportionately vulnerable to injustice, they are also disproportionately victims of injustice. In human history, injustice is not equally distributed. We all face injustice, but some people face it more than others. The most vulnerable will face it more than others. That is true historically. It's interesting, if you study out the Old Testament and the law, Leviticus is not a super exciting read if you don't understand context. If you do, it can become very exciting. It's not just, usually when people are trying to find God, where should I start? If I hate them, I say Leviticus. That'll get you going. But if you've been around a little bit and you can see what God is doing, it paints some pretty beautiful pictures of what God was trying to do with Israel. And one of the things he was doing is he was building Israel, which is, the ancient, God's people in ancient times. He built them on the concept of mishpat. The idea is he built and instituted rules and guidelines that the people had to do to be obedient to the law. But those guidelines, perhaps people didn't even realize, it was to protect the most vulnerable in their society. So, There are scriptures where he says, don't glean to the edges of your field. So glean 9/10 of your field, because I think this is agrarian, right? Most people are harvesting different agrarian things. That was not a prepared sentence, so there you go. But don't go all the way to the edge. Don't get greedy. Leave the edge for the poor. It's pretty powerful. Like don't, and it says when you're getting your olives off the trees, don't shake that olive tree. And there's some proverbs about that. Like don't shake that olive tree too much. Like the whole point is like be generous. Don't be greedy. Because who's going to go back and get those olives? The poor, the vulnerable. That's the one. Those are who's going to go. You know, in Exodus 23, it says, on the 7th year, don't sow your field or harvest what comes up. Leave it for the poor and the wild animals. God's like to care about the wild animals. Leave it for those who need it more. Which means you have to prepare. God expected Israel to prepare to be generous. In the 6th year, harvest extra, so that in the 7th year, you can be generous. Amazing. There's a year of Jubilee, a year where you return lands and cancel debts. The basis of the law is that all people had access. This is one of the foundations of the law, not the single. The single most important was to love the Lord your God, right? But part of how we carried that out was that all people were to have access to the means of production necessary to support themselves and their families. Like, the law wasn't about giving handouts, but it was about providing opportunities so people could earn their way and support their families. Instead of the poor having to resort to begging, slavery, prostitution, or other degrading means of finding a way to live, they were given the opportunity to provide for themselves with good hard work. And we studied out a couple of years ago the book of Ruth in the Bible, and perhaps the book of Ruth as a singular book is the greatest example of Mishpat. Ruth is an orphan. She's not with her home. She only has her stepmom, her husband, her father-in-law, and her brother-in-law have all died. And she's in a foreign land. She's all of them. She's all for it. And through the kindness of a man that was just doing God's will, her family was completely restored. And we find out later that's a really beautiful part of the line of Jesus, right? So the question is, we know what God was saying then, but what's his expectation of us now? In Matthew 22, go ahead and turn there. And Matthew 22, a couple more thoughts, and then I'm going to have a couple other people share it for a second as well. Matthew 22, perhaps, when you say big statements, you have to say perhaps before it. Perhaps the most important scripture in the Bible. Because Jesus through God is sharing the most important thing. In verse 37, Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. He said, everything else I tell you is predicated on these two things. I will teach you what it means to love people, but you have to choose to love people. You do that by loving God. This is repeated often. Old, New Testament. It's a constant truth that to love God is the most important thing in your life. Because it will always trickle down to everything else. Mishpat is just an outpouring of the way you feel about God and the way you choose to live for God, right? But sometimes it's hard to do. If I were to boil it down, I would say that our purpose is to love God and our mission is to love people. We don't want to confuse the two. If we make it our purpose to love people, sometimes it means we won't love God. Our purpose has to be love God with all your heart, and as an outpouring, a good symptom of that is that you love people, the fruit of that.
Right.
God has the expectation that we will be intentional about the way we love people. People don't feel loved on accident.
Yeah.
They don't. It requires intention. It's rare for you to accidentally make someone feel really special. It doesn't happen in my marriage. It doesn't happen in my friendships. It's when I make a choice to be intentional. And intent is so important to God. What do you intend? And it's so important to us, isn't it? Making your intentions clear is important. This was true when I was single, and I was trying to make clear how I felt about a young woman. And I remember, I'll give you a story. I liked Kristen for years. Kristen is my wife now, if you don't know. Who's this Kristen person? It's my wife. I liked her for years. before she liked me. I know that's so hard for you to believe. How could that be? It's the truth. And I waited. But during that time, I spent some time, and so I just knew she was always the dream, but then I'd leave, I'd go somewhere for like another summer, and I wouldn't forget about her, but I'd be like, I don't know, maybe I'm shooting too high. And like there would be like a summer fling. Summer fling? Summer fling? That all sounds weird. I didn't prep it. I wasn't planning the story. But I remember one year, there was a girl I liked and I liked her. And it was going great. And I needed to make my intentions clear. Right? And I didn't want to be weird about it. I didn't want to be like, she'll probably just guess by the way I opened the door. Or by the way I talked to her a little more smooth. And I'm not smooth at all. But I certainly wasn't. It's pretty awkward. And I remember I was intentional. I called her up after that summer. I said, I like you. And I want to date you. What do I gotta do? She was like, there's nothing you can do. Because I don't like you. I was like, at least we were clear. She was like, to be clear, I did. But you waited too long. And I said, okay. It's fine. And I'm glad I waited too long.
Come on now.
It worked out for the best. It was important. I don't even know if the story's going to work. We're going to go. It was really important that my intentions were made clear. When they weren't made clear, she didn't even know. She had no idea I felt that way. And it probably changed, I don't know if it changed my future. In some ways it did. I do think it's true that sometimes we are not intentional in the way we love people.
Yeah.
And, you know, perhaps you've heard of the 5 love languages before. I'm not even trying to rattle them off because I always get this one that's different every time. But there's a pretty famous modern author wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages, and the concept is that people feel loved in different ways. Some people feel loved by the words you say, or by the physical touch, or by acts of service. And we all kind of have our thing, and you take a test, you know. It's like you're a level 12, and you're a 10 here, a 0 there. You know, and it's like the 0 stick. You're like, I'm the best at that, and they don't like it. And I do think it's true that we can be a little bougie about the way we feel loved. I can be that way. Well, you didn't love me just like you didn't love me like my test said you're supposed to. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's important that we're able to understand when someone's showing us love. The point is, we all do feel loved in different ways. Yeah. But the common denominator is that we feel loved when there's an intent to love. Yeah. When someone wants to make it happen, they go out of their way to make it happen. And I think when it comes to loving the vulnerable, the poor, the people that are vulnerable in society, it almost never happens by accident. Yeah. It has to be intentional because our lives are so full. They're so full, and with good things, but sometimes not. Like it's not right in front of us the same way. We can be conflicted about how to love the poor. My son asked me, you know, well, how are we going to help this man? And I'm kind of like, well, I've watched some YouTube videos, and I don't know if I should. You know what I mean? Like I heard somebody say one time they might use it on drugs. You know, it's like my justification for not helping, right? Like, and now we have a way we do it. Usually we ask if they're hungry. You know, we buy them food. And sometimes I'll give money and I just kind of feel it out in the moment. You know, what they're going to do with it is up to them, it's between them and God. I think for us, though, you have to learn to be intentional about the way you love the vulnerable. I guess my question for you is, are you? Like, is this an intentional part of your life? We talk about it a fair amount. And I'm not just talking about giving money, though I think giving money is beautiful. I think there are some organizations that are really good with making your money go a long way. The two that come to mind are our family of churches works closely with an organization called Hope Worldwide. And their mission statement's about helping those in the hardest situations around the world, basically. They do a lot of great things. Chris and I really love World Vision. World Vision is, sometimes you have to go to like a Christian bookstore. Those don't really, there's not that many of them around anymore. But sometimes you'll see like little booklets with like a child on them. Perhaps you've seen these before. And you can sponsor a child from the time that they're a baby until they graduate high school and provide for their village and them. You know, there's all kinds of cool ways that it happens, but I'm talking about, too, interacting with the vulnerable in our community. You know, that's actually quite challenging, I have found. Finding the avenues to do that. Finding the time, making the time. Have you ever realized that you really are missing something in your, this is happening right now as we speak in my life. There's this area in my leadership that I realized I've neglected. And so one thing you can do is you can get freaked out and overwhelmed with, where am I going to find the time? you can't create more time. You can only reallocate your time to the appropriate priorities. I'm not asking you to create more time. I'm asking you to consider whether you've prioritized it as Jesus intended for you to do so. Have you done that? In the 40s and 50s after World War II, the infrastructure of Europe was destroyed. And the World Bank was created by a council of countries to rebuild Europe's infrastructure. So they poured money into this bank, and it worked beautifully. I mean, in a decade, it was transformed after the war. And they were like, well, this was so effective, let's use it to combat global poverty, which is kind of unanimously realized as the worst blight on humanity, is global poverty. And so, I'm talking about trillions of dollars was poured into the same concept. Give this bank so it can give out, and it didn't work. It totally failed. And what was realized by the people that were leading this effort was that perhaps what was needed wasn't money. Material wealth was exactly what was needed to rebuild the infrastructure because the desire to rebuild it was there. But they found in combating poverty that they seemed to be doing something wrong. And so after it failed in the 60s, they conducted a survey where they interviewed 60,000 impoverished people from 60 low-income countries, and they asked them one question: what is poverty? And the results are published in a 3-volume work called Voices of the Poor. The primary takeaway for us is that overwhelmingly, people that live in a first world country think of poverty in material terms. They don't have enough. But overwhelmingly, the poor describe poverty themselves in more psychological terms. They use words like shame and inferiority, powerlessness, humiliation, fear, hopelessness, depression, social isolation, and voicelessness. That's how they describe the feeling of poverty. So we're thinking about that, and I was thinking, so what does that mean then? In our context right now, how do we reach the most vulnerable in our society? And of course, you can have a debate on who the most vulnerable are in our society, but who can we all agree are vulnerable? And after the first year of living here, we had a group of people together, and we talked a lot about this, and we decided that I believe the best way to do this number one is children. Children are incredibly vulnerable. Who works with kids? Who works with development? Because there's a time to go to a soup kitchen and make meals. We do that too. But I think there's another layer of interacting, of being known and knowing people, right? Engaging perhaps the true source of poverty, which is the feeling of inferiority and not having a voice. You can't do that with money, right? Material wealth isn't going to do it all. And that's where I want to close with a thought on what we at Ann Arbor Church have chosen to really focus our attention on. There's a lot of places you can focus your attention, right? We're not going to discriminate in that way. Any way you feel like you can do Mishpat in your life, I trust that you and God are having that conversation, and that's great. But what I found is that if you're not presented with a great opportunity, it's really hard to find one. Yeah. And so the 2 primary areas that we've laid into in Ann Arbor Church is with Big Brother, Big Sisters, and an organization called Friends Indeed Circles. I want to highlight Big Brothers, Big Sisters for a moment, and I want to have 2 people share briefly about their experience with it. And then we'll close and we'll take communion, right? Big Brother, Big Sister, and again, it's a pretty well-known, it's not a household name, but it's probably well-known, even if you haven't heard people speak here about it. It's fairly well-known. It's a mentoring program, and it's nationwide. It's great. You have to take 10 hours of, training to more than that even, to become qualified for it. They do background checks, the whole thing. And what it does is Big Brothers Big Sisters identifies schools in special need that the social workers identify kids that have the greatest need just socially and in their lives. And it's various reasons. It's not just one type of human. It's, from all different demographics, walks of life, races, the whole thing. You run the gambit, but the number one common denominator is that the kid wants a friend, and the parents, if they're around, also want that, and the social worker agrees. So these 3 come together, and the kid has choice, and they get on a waiting list and say, I want a big, as we call it. And then And if a big comes around that matches them well, they match them. And one of the things that our church is especially engaged in is their lunch program. At 2 schools in the area, Estabrook and Erickson Elementary, these schools have been identified as having a disproportionately high number of kids who need this help, and of parents who believe that, of children themselves who want it. And the kids go on a waiting list, and they just wait. They literally just wait for a friend. And the research, I don't have time to talk about it, the research about like the impact you can have in a child's life when you devote even just an hour a week, 45 minutes a week, is startling. I mean, the trajectory of lives are completely changed. Because a lot of these kids just need someone to look up to that's a great role model and that like cares about them. And so I think that, for a lot of people, it's very accessible for people with jobs, even if they're 9 to 5. You go to school like Monday or Wednesday at 12:15 for like 45 minutes, and you just play with them, and you do like games, and you meet family. Eventually, sometimes you meet family, and it's just a really beautiful thing. And I wanted to open it up again because I think there are people in this room that actually want to do this, like that feel excited about it, but either keep forgetting or it's not in your head. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Mike Polk and Kathy Britton share, because they've both actually been doing this for probably like 6 to 10 months or so, I don't know. I just want to have them share their experience a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass a sheet of paper around. All I want to do, I'm not going to like post this on the wall, like so everyone knows who wrote their name. It's not meant to be weird. The only reason I'm having you write your name down is because if you want to know more about it, you can talk to me, because I have a pretty good relationship with the woman that kind of runs it, and I can help you get connected if you like, and that way I can reach out to you. So I'm just going to pass the paper around. You should feel no guilt letting it go by. It's just for you to give to me so I can see. The only quality is that you're a human who loves humans. You know what I mean? And you'll go through the training, and they'll determine if you're a good fit. Right now, just in Ann Arbor and Ypsi, there are 16 kids waiting. 8 boys and 8 girls from 2nd to 4th grade. So there's a legitimate need, as we speak. These kids walk by the gym every day, and they see other kids playing with their bigs, and I'm telling you, every week they come up to Rachel, the lady, and they're like, hey, you got anybody for me? And she's always like, I'm still, it's just like heart-wrenching, And I'm not trying to just guilt you into do it, It's more that I want you to know the need is there at the present. So, Kathy, I'll have you come up first, and then Mike, you come back afterwards. Now I just asked them just to share their experience, whatever really. I gave them the floor, so they start saying crazy stuff. It was not my instruction. It's just what happens, right? Take it away.
Can you guys hear me okay without the mic?
Yeah, you're fine. Okay.
First of all, Kyle kind of stole my thunder. Used up a lot of my stuff there. Okay. So I grew up in Detroit. I was raised by a single mom. It was just the 2 of us. My dad left when I was a baby. So I was the only kid I knew who didn't have a father at home, which somehow came up all the time, apparently. My mom had to work long hours. She would drop me off at the sitter around 6 a.m., come back, pick me up around 6 p.m. So I spent a lot of time alone. At school, this is going to be hard to believe, I was frequently in trouble, spending much of the 2nd grade with my desk out in the hallway. My teacher was not fond of me. One day she kicked me out of class saying, "Get out of here, Miss Sampico." And I said, "Where should I go?" That was my name. I said, "Where should I go?" And she goes, "I don't care where to go." So I walked down the hall and went to the office. Fortunately, the principal made her take me back the next day. My grades were bad. I had trouble learning to read. I was just kind of a mess. So I was a problem, and I was certain that there was something wrong with me. I thought that I was somehow different and unworthy, which fits in a little bit with what Kyle was talking about there. So why am I telling you this? Because you may be wondering why a kid would forego their lunch recess to hang out with an adult. Perhaps you, for example. It could be that giving them your undivided attention for just 1 hour a week tells them that they are valued and worth the effort. The research shows that these kids benefit greatly from the program, and it could be life-changing for them. So every Wednesday, I get the pleasure of Brooklyn's company. We hang out for an hour in the gym, maybe throw the football around or maybe shoot baskets or play games, and it's a win-win. And Emily. I know.
So like I've been going to Big Brothers Big Sisters for started at the start of this year, and my little's name is Jordan, and pretty much all he wants to do every time is play soccer. So that's literally what we do. For most of the year, you know, or a lot of times I let him win, and then like school just started back, so he has had like the summer, and for most of the last year, I was like taking it easy a lot or letting him win. And then like last week, he is faster than me now, like on the gym, because it's kind of slippery. I don't need to make too many excuses, but it's kind of slippery. And so like I was literally drenched in sweat at the end of it. I was like, I got like a workout today. So, but you know, in the kind of the off times that we're not playing soccer, they have icebreaker things where you're kind of getting to know each other, that kind of thing. And I just wanted to share, like, when we talked about this last year, I didn't really want to do it. Like, I don't like kids that much. I like my kids, and those are like the first two kids. I was like, I really like these kids. Yeah. But like, there wasn't like an innate like, oh, I just want to like hang out with the kids, you know. And for a while, it was hard to feel like he really appreciated the time. Because we were just playing, you know, then that was that. You know, we were just playing, and there wasn't really a lot of good, like, heart-to-heart interaction, which, you know, at the bar maybe needed to be a little lower. But that's changed through the year. And I think, like, with a lot of these kids, they want to see that you're in there with them. And I've also noticed that, like, my heart has also softened, like, through the year. And I think at first I was like, all right, I should do this because honestly, I think it'll be outside of my comfort zone. And I think this is something I could see Jesus doing. Like, he loved kids. But now, as like through the year, I've really seen God change that about my heart and how me be like, oh, I'm excited, you know, to go. And now I'm like, yeah, that's like a workout too. I do want to echo one last thing that Kyle mentioned. This is not like a forced program at all. The kids really want to be there. So, you know, there was one time late in the spring where I missed a week, and I had been feeling, and I told Rachel, the coordinator, this. I was like, I kind of feel like he just like wants to play sports. Doesn't really want to hang out with me like that much, you know. And she was like, he was crying last week when you weren't there. You know, he like cried in school, you know. I was like, wow, like even if he doesn't know how to express his gratitude, like it's there, you know what I mean? So it's been, so there's still been like days where I'm like, oh, it's Monday, I got a lot to do at work today, you know, or reasons why I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta do it. But I've also noticed a lot more like, oh, I'm excited, like I get to go hang out with this kid and, you know, I think make a difference in his life. So thanks everyone, it's been great.
So yeah, try to pull those heartstrings, you know, just work it. Yeah, I have the honor of working, my little is a boy named Darion, and we were together last week, and we were given a list of 50 questions to answer, and I was like, 50? She's like, you do 10. I was like, okay, good, because that's a lot. And one of the questions was, what's your best friend's favorite color? And he asked me, and I was like, I don't know. And I asked him, and he's like, well, what's your favorite color? Just so your intent is clear, are you saying I'm your best friend? He's like, you're my best friend. And I was like, I gotta sit with that. You know what I mean? Like absorb that for him. So, yeah, just encouragement for you. Obviously, if the opportunity's there and the time's there, great. There's a lot of ways to serve God. This isn't the only way, but we want to present you with this opportunity. Okay. What we're going to do now is, as we move towards the end of our service, I'm going to say a prayer here for the Lord's Supper. And, of course, this is a time to remember Jesus. You know, it's not the perfect lead-in. It wasn't like, yeah, like, love the poor, let's talk about it. You know what I mean? It's not this. But all of this stuff is because of Jesus, right? Like, I would never talk about this if not because I wanted us all to want to be like Jesus. And I think in the end, because of what he did for us, right? Like his death, like it never gets old. Like that truth is always changing our life. And so I'm going to say a prayer, and we're going to sing a song. It's a newer song that I think is reflective of the day. And then and we'll have our announcements and we'll close it out, all right? Let's pray. Father God, we love you so much, and we're grateful for all you've done for us. Father, continue, please, to work in a powerful